All right, guys, today I'm going to be giving you a brief overview of how to call in close air support, or CAS. Close air support is responsive, flexible, and capable of employing a wide range of weapons, and if used properly, can significantly turn the tide on the battlefield. Any request for close air support is going to follow a predictable sequence. Step 1 being the arrival of the air support and your check-in brief. Step 2 being your CAS brief, or your 9-line and control of attack. And step 3 being your battle damage assessment, otherwise known as your BDA. The reason for these standardized briefs is they provide essential info for approval, coordination, integration, control, and for the aircraft. As you would expect, close air support is a little bit more complex than your typical call for fire, and that's the reason these standardized briefs are so important. It ensures that the JTAC and the aircraft are on the same page, and it also ensures that friendly forces are not going to be in harm's way. So, the first step in your CAS sequence is the CAS check-in brief. During this sequence, the aircraft checks in with their status, and the JTAC replies with the situation brief. The goal of the check-in brief is to build situational awareness, both for the JTAC and for the aircraft, and to exchange necessary information in order to conduct the close air support missions. So, this is what your CAS check-in looks like. This is the aircraft talking to the JTAC. Obviously, first of all, we're going to check in with our call signs. So controller call sign in this case will be Comanche, and the aircraft call sign, we're going to use Blade. So the first line, it will just be Comanche, this is Blade. Now, line 1 of the actual check-in is going to be the identification or mission number. For this case, we're going to use mission number 0341. Line 2 is the number and type of aircraft. In this case, we have 2 F-35Bs. Line 3 is the position and or altitude of the aircraft. In this case, we're going to imagine they're at 8,000 feet. Line 4 is the ordnance the aircraft is carrying. In this case, it'll be 2 by Mark 82 bombs. Line 5 is time on station. The typical format for time on station is how many hours you have plus how many minutes you have. So in this case, we're going to imagine that our F-35s have 15 minutes on station. It would sound like time on station 0 + 15. And then line 6 is the abort code. In this case, our abort code will be Foxtrot uniform. So the entire thing put together will sound like this. Comanche, this is Blade, mission number 0341. I have 2 by F-35Bs flying at 8,000 feet. I'm carrying 2 by Mark 82 bombs, time on station 0 + 15, abort code Foxtrot uniform. Now, after the aircraft checks in with the JTAC is going to provide the aircraft with a sitrep. The sitrep is 10 lines, and I ran out of space here on the whiteboard to give an example, but I'll get to that in a minute. Right now, I just want to go over what each of these 10 lines are. So obviously, first you're going to start with your check-in. So aircraft call sign, this is controller call sign. In this case, Blade, this is Comanche. Line 1 is situation update number. Line 2 is target or general enemy activity. Line 3 is threat activity. Line 4 is friendly situation. Line 5 is artillery activity. This also applies to mortars. Line 6 is clearance authority. Line 7 is ordnance requested. Line 8 is restrictions or remarks. Line 9 is localized SEAD efforts, if that's applicable, if this is a SEAD mission. And line 10 is hazards such as terrain or obstacles that the aircraft needs to be aware of. So here we have the JTAC to aircraft sitrep filled out with a pretty simple CAS mission. Line 1, the situation update number is going to be Alpha Bravo 1001. Line 2, the target and general enemy activity. You want to be as detailed as necessary here. So for this case, we're going to say machine gun position in the tree line west of my position. Line 3, when I say threats, I mean threats to the aircraft. Does the enemy have anti-aircraft capabilities? In this case, we're going to keep it simple. We're going to say they have no threats. Line 4, the friendly situation. Again, you want to be pretty detailed here in terms of the orientation and position of your friendly so that the aircraft is able to identify between your forces and between their target. So line 4 will say, my squad is in a defensive position oriented north to south. You can get more detailed with that, referencing specific geography or terrain features. Line 5, again, we'll keep it simple. We're going to say there's no active fire missions at this time. Line 6, the clearance authority. This is simply who's requesting the fire mission. So the clearance authority ultimately rests with the supported commander for CAS missions. So it can be as simple as saying, commander requests. Line 7, the ordnance, 1 by Mark 82 bomb. Line 8, restrictions remarks. This is just where you want to add anything that hasn't been covered up to this point that is relevant to the CAS mission. So for this example, for line 8, I have a map, a compass, and a smoke grenade. That's going to tell the aircraft what your capabilities are in terms of marking the target and in terms of determining the aircraft's final attack heading. Line 9, because this is not a SEAD mission, it's not applicable, so we'll just skip that. And then line 10, again, keeping it simple, no hazards. So altogether, the JTAC aircraft sitrep will sound like this. Blade, this is Comanche, Alpha Bravo 1001. There's an enemy machine gun position in the tree line west of my position. No threats. My squad is in a defensive position oriented north to south. We have no active fire missions. Commander requests 1 by Mark 82 bomb. I have a map, compass, and smoke grenade. No hazards. All right, so at this point, we're done with our check-in brief. The JTAC and the aircraft both have increased situational awareness about the CAS mission they're about to be conducting. Now we're gonna move on to the meat of the CAS, which is the CAS brief or the 9 line. This 9 line is the standard brief for all aircraft, regardless of threat condition. It does not dictate aircrew tactics. Lines 4, 6, and any restrictions are mandatory readback items from the aircraft to the JTAC. The JTAC may require other readback items. Before we start our CAS mission, we have to decide what type of control we're going to be using for it. There are 3 types. Type 1 control is where the JTAC must visually acquire both the aircraft and the target for each attack. Some examples where it needs to be used is when the JTAC needs to analyze the attacking aircraft's geometry in order to reduce the risk to friendly forces. It can be used in cases of adverse weather. It might be used if there's a lack of confidence in the platform, or it might be used if there's a coalition language barrier there. If I speak English and I'm talking with a French pilot, I might want to utilize type 1 control. That way I have to visually acquire both the target and the aircraft in order to ensure that no mistakes happen. Type 2 control is a situation where the JTAC requires control of individual attacks and any or all of the following conditions exist. 1, the JTAC is unable to visually acquire the attacking aircraft at weapons release. 2, the JTAC is unable to visually acquire the target. Or 3, the aircraft is unable to visually acquire the mark or target prior to weapons release. And some examples of where this might come into play are night attacks, inclement weather, or working with aircraft that are flying at extremely high altitudes where the JTAC might not be able to see them. Lastly, we have type 3 control. This is used for multiple attacks within a single engagement. During a type 3 control attack, the JTAC will grant blanket weapons release clearance. This is when the JTAC will say, cleared to engage. JTAC visual acquisition of the aircraft or the target is not required. However, the JTAC will still monitor the attack by all means necessary. Other observers may be utilized to provide targeting data or marks, and all targeting data must be coordinated through the supported commander's battle staff. Changing my angle here because the lighting was kind of creating a glare on the board. Unfortunately, it didn't fix my handwriting. But line 1 is your IP or BP. That stands for initial point or battle position. And line 1 is going to be one or the other. It's not both of these. So to understand what each of these mean, IP or initial point is a visually identifiable geographic point used for navigational updates during the attack run, and it's normally located within 5 to 15 nautical miles from the target area. This is typically used for fixed-wing aircraft. So think if there's a mountain or a canyon or some other visually identifiable geographic reference, so that as the airplane comes in, once it hits that point, it'll update the JTAC, and the JTAC will know, okay, I am aware now of this aircraft's position. It's at the IP. The other option is your BP, or battle position. This is more typically used for your rotary wing aircraft, your attack helicopters. So a BP provides firing positions, cover and concealment, and it is within the effective range of the weapon being employed. Oftentimes your battle position is going to be selected by your forward air controller, because they typically have a greater understanding of those aircraft's capabilities and tactics in terms of maneuvering. So for battle positions, think buildings or mountains or hills, something that a helicopter would be able to duck behind as it's engaging the target in order to provide it cover and concealment. Line 2 is where you're going to give the aircraft their heading. So for fixed wing, you're drawing a straight line magnetic from the IP to the target. And with rotary wing, you're drawing a straight line magnetic from the center of the BP to the target. Again, IP being initial point and BP being battle point. Other than that, it's the same between fixed wing and rotary wing. Another thing to take into consideration with line 2 is the offset direction. This is an optional restriction that you can give to your aircraft. It's specified as left or right, and it's used in conjunction with the IP or BP to target heading and with the final attack heading, which is something I'll get into later. Aircraft can proceed direct or in the direction of the offset, but aircraft compliance is mandatory. And offset direction is used to coordinate fire support, manage battle space geometry, and position aircraft for target acquisition and ordnance release. And I'll get into an example here in just a minute so you guys know what I'm talking about. So this is an example of offset right. So down here, the shaded circle represents our IP or BP, and up here, the shaded triangle represents our target. The dotted line is the straight magnetic heading from our IP or BP to the target. Again, IP or BP depending on whether we have fixed wing or rotary wing. However, over here, we have some motivated tube strokers suppressing an enemy air defense target. And this line represents their gun target line. So we give the direction offset right to the aircraft, meaning they can either proceed in a straight line from the IP or BP to the target, or they can offset right, which I've drawn here. This is my depiction of a jet aircraft. They can offset right, taking a wider angle to the right and attacking the target like that. It can do either of these things. What it cannot do is go anywhere to the left of the IP BP line to the target. It can't go anywhere to the left of here because this airspace is conflicted. Line 3 is distance. This one's a little more straightforward. For fixed wing, it's the straight line distance from the IP to the target in nautical miles to the nearest 1/10 of a mile. And for rotary wing, it's a straight line from the center of the BP to the target in the nearest 100 meters. Line 4 is also pretty straightforward. This is your target elevation. Usually you would acquire this from a map or a chart. The important thing to remember is that you're expressing this in feet, not meters. And also remember, line 4 is a mandatory readback item, meaning the aircraft must read back line 4 to the JTAC before conducting the CAS mission. Line 5 is target description. This is a general description. However, it should be specific enough that the aircrew is able to recognize the target. Use visual cues such as formation, orientation, and key terrain in order to guide the aircrew onto the target. Some more on line 5. An example of a bad target description would be enemy squad in the tree line. Okay, that doesn't give the aircrew a whole lot to work with. If you as the JTAC are unable to observe yourself and that's the best you can come up with, okay, that's what you gotta go with. But if you can give more description, you should. So a better description would be enemy squad in a defensive position, oriented west, spread out north to south, in the tree line 300 meters east of the river. You see how this one gives the aircrew a lot more to work with in terms of actually pinpointing a specific location that they should fire as opposed to this first one. Line 6 is the target location. Typically, this is going to be either a 6 or 8 digit grid or latitude or longitude pulled from a map or a GPS. Line 6 is also a mandatory readback item. Line 7 is the mark type. This means what you are marking the target with so that the aircraft has an easier time visually identifying it. Some examples of mark types include white phosphorus or red phosphorus, illumination, HE, laser target designator, or your IR pointer. Now, if you're using indirect fire as a means to mark your target, meaning mortars or artillery, your marks should be at least within 300 meters of the target, meaning those rounds need to be landing within 300 meters of the target in order for them to be considered close enough for the aircrew to be able to visually acquire the target. However, ideally, your marks are within 100 meters of the target. That's really the golden sweet spot that we're looking for. So again, if we're talking about white phosphorus or red phosphorus illumination, or HE, which is what you would be using something like mortars for in order to mark the target. They need to be within 300 meters of the target's location, and ideally within 100 meters of the target's location. Some more about line 7. So the USMC standards for when your mark should hit prior to the time on target, meaning prior to when the ordnance is actually going to hit the target. Again, for the USMC, for white phosphorus or red phosphorus, the standard is 30 seconds prior to TOT, meaning that white phosphorus or red phosphorus is bursting 30 seconds prior to the aircraft's time on target. For illumination, the standard is 45 seconds prior. And for infrared marks, the standard is 20 to 30 seconds prior. Some other factors to take into consideration here. Terrain and weather may obscure your mark. So if it's really windy out or really rainy out, white phosphorus or red phosphorus might not work as well because the wind could blow the smoke away. Again, on the smoke, battlefield smoke may hinder the use of white phosphorus because you can't tell the difference between the white phosphorus that's meant to mark the target and maybe somebody's using a smoke grenade within that range as well. Aircrew tactics may limit visibility. What do I mean by this? Well, again, if you're using rotary wing and you're flying really low to the ground, the odds that you're going to be able to see a mark on the ground like white phosphorus, if you're flying just above a tree line, are pretty low. Something like an illumination round from a mortar would work much better in that circumstance because it's so vertical that the helicopters would be able to see it even if they're flying low and close to the tree line. Elements of surprise. Again, this is why we have our time on target standards. If it's the middle of the day and the enemy sees an illumination round being popped above their heads, it's probably a good sign to them that they should run for cover or dig in because an airstrike might be imminent. So that's why we have the time on target standards. You don't want to mark your target too soon. You don't want to mark it too late either because the aircraft needs to be able to visually acquire the target, but you don't want to do it too soon. Redundant marks. If your target has already been destroyed and the aircraft is coming through for a second pass on another target, don't mark the target that's already destroyed. It should go without saying, but that miscommunication between what's going on the ground and what the aircraft sees could be the difference between the target being destroyed and the target getting away. And finally, if your marks fail, it doesn't mean that you have to abandon the CAS mission. It just means that you have to use a visual talk on instead. Line 8 is the friendly location. This is referenced from the target using a cardinal direction and a distance in meters. So an example would be southwest 2,500 meters. Easy enough. It's important to keep in mind that this is not always the same position as the JTAC or the forward air controller is. They may be located away from the rest of the friendly units, so that's something to keep in mind as well. But just to reiterate, you're not giving the aircraft your position as the JTAC, you're giving the aircraft the position of the friendlies that they're supporting. Line 9 is where you give the aircraft their egress, and this can be as simple or as detailed as required by mission. So I've got two examples up here. A simple egress would be egress south to Kilo. That's it, easy day. A complex one would sound like egress south to Kilo, then east. Report Mike at base plus 10, be advised attic 3-1 is Mike base plus 12, acknowledge. Again, this all depends on the situation and how controlling you want to be of the aircraft and whether you want them to do any follow-on missions. After line 9, we have our remarks. These are items critical to mission accomplishment that we have not covered thus far in the 9 lines leading up to this point. So some examples include laser target line, pointer target line, final attack heading or headings, other fires if it's a SEAD mission, altitude restrictions, follow-on attacks, or really anything else that you think the aircraft should be aware of that you haven't told them up to this point. The remarks section is where you would tell them. So up here I've written an example of a remark that the JTAC might be giving an aircraft. LTL 341, final attack headings 280 to 330. Arty will be conducting continuous suppression on an SA-8 north 4,000 from your target. Stay above 3,500. Request IP inbound call. I'm going to break this down and tell you kind of what all of it means because I know it's a lot. So LTL, that's laser target line 341. So in this case, our JTAC is using a laser to mark the target for the aircraft. Final attack headings, I'll be getting into a little bit later. Arty will be conducting continuous suppression on an SA-8 north 4,000 from your target. So again, we're deconflicting airspace and we're giving the aircraft situational awareness of what's happening on the ground. In this case, it's probably a SEAD mission. So we're telling the aircraft that there is artillery that is firing concurrent with what the aircraft is doing. And we're telling the aircraft to stay above 3,500 feet in order to deconflict that airspace. And then lastly, request IP inbound call. All that means is that we're requesting that when the aircraft is about to reach their IP, again, initial point, they give us a call and say, hey, we're at the IP. So I've mentioned it a couple times thus far. I'm going to get into what your final attack headings mean and the advantages and disadvantages between having just one final attack heading or several final attack headings. So with one final attack heading, this is a single heading that all attack aircraft are going to be following as they're engaging the target. So coming in from the IP or the BP to the target, all of your attack aircraft are going to be on this single heading. So it's extremely restrictive in that regard. However, it helps fire support coordination. That's the benefit of having one final attack heading. The alternative is final attack headings with an S at the end, multiple final attack headings. So in the last example I just gave of remarks, it was final attack headings between 280 and 330. What this means is that all the aircraft that are attacking must stay within that range of headings. However, it gives them increased flexibility in order to maybe conduct some more complex maneuvering or tactics. And deciding which one of these to use all depends on the situation. So for example, if we're in a situation where there's a lot of artillery and mortar fire, it might be smarter to use a single final attack heading. That way you have stricter control of the aircraft and you ensure airspace deconfliction. However, if there's not that concern and you want your aircraft to be able to maneuver more freely, it might be better to give them several final attack headings so that the pilots and the aircrew can decide what angle they want to attack from. So this is our whole close air support mission. I'm going to go through each line individually and do some recap. So obviously we start off with a you, this is me transmission. So Blade, this is Comanche. Then we establish what type of control we're using. In this case, we're going to be using type 1 control. For line 1, our initial point or battle position. For this scenario, we're going to assume that the initial point has already been established and given a name. In this case, it's called IP dog. Line 2, our heading and offset. Heading 240, offset right. Again, we talked about that. That means that the aircraft can attack directly at the heading 240, or it can offset right, but it cannot traverse to the left of that heading. Distance 10 miles, that's the distance between our initial point and our target. And again, because for this case, we're going to be using a fixed wing aircraft, we're calling our distance in miles. If it were rotary wing, we would be doing it in hundreds of meters. Line 4, target elevation 800, that's in feet, not meters. Line 5, target description. Again, a little bit detailed here so that the aircrew can visually acquire the target a little bit easier. Enemy squad oriented north in a defensive position in the open, 250 meters south of the town. That's going to be adequate enough for them to be able to identify that target. Line 6, target location, we're using a 6-digit grid, Uniform Fox 860744. Type 7 mark, Willie P, white phosphorus. Line 8, friendly location, again using a cardinal direction and meters, east 1500. That means that friendly forces are 1,500 meters east of this grid where the target is, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the JTAC is in that position. And line 9, egress, pretty simple here, egress south to Kilo. Remarks, stay above 3,000 feet, and our time on target or time to target, in this case, immediate, meaning as soon as the aircraft is able to release that ordnance, it's going to release that ordnance. So I'm gonna rattle off the whole thing so that you guys can hear what an actual CAS would sound like without me jabbering in between and kind of trying to explain everything. Blade, this is Comanche, type 1 control, IP dog, heading 240, offset right, 10 miles, target elevation 800 feet. I've got an enemy squad oriented north in a defensive position in the open, 250 meters south of the town. 6-digit grid, Uniform Fox 860744, mark with Willie P. Friendlies are located east 1,500 meters. Egress south to Kilo, stay above 3,000 feet, TOT immediate. I'm gonna give you one more example, this time with a rotary wing aircraft. And again, I'm just gonna rattle through this whole thing. Blade, this is Comanche Type 3 control, BP fish, heading 160, no offset, distance 2,000 meters, target elevation 400 feet. Machine gun in a 3-story building on the northeast corner of the town next to the open lot. Line 6, Charlie Kilo 556762, mark with IR pointer. Line 8, South 500, egress west to Kilo. Request a BP inbound call, TOT immediate. Finally, after your attack has been completed, when possible, the JTAC is going to provide the aircraft with a BDA, or battle damage assessment, upon the aircraft's egress. The general rule is if you don't see it, don't report it. However, you should be giving the aircraft at minimum a call of successful or unsuccessful as to how they did on the attack. The BDA is 6 lines, the first being the call sign, Blade, this is Comanche. Second being mission number, Alpha Bravo 0341. Third being the location of the target. In this case, we use a 6-digit grid, Uniform Fox 782446. The fourth being the time of the attack. In this case, we'll imagine the attack was at 1930. The fifth being the results, and again, this is where at minimum you need to say successful or unsuccessful, but in this case we can be a little more specific, and we're going to say target destroyed. And then 6 is remarks, which is optional. This is anything that you would want to add about the attack. The last thing I want to cover today are the 4 terminal controller calls. These are the 4 calls that the JTAC can make to the aircraft and what they mean in terms of ordnance expansion. The first call is abort. This one's pretty self-explanatory. It means that the aircraft is going to abort the pass and is not cleared to release any ordnance. The second call is cleared hot, everybody's favorite. That means that the aircraft is cleared to release ordnance. The third call is continue. That means that the aircraft is cleared to proceed, but may not yet release ordnance. This is used to acknowledge the aircraft without granting them the ability to release the ordnance yet. And finally, the fourth controller call is cleared to engage. This is used for Type 3 control only, which we already talked about. This means that the aircraft may initiate attacks within the JTAC's parameters, and this ends when the aircraft says attack complete to the JTAC. It's important to note that the word cleared may only be used when ordnance is cleared to be expended. If you use cleared in any other context, it's not considered correct, and it could lead to some nasty consequences if the aircraft were to release that ordnance where they're not supposed to. Thank you for watching. This is really just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to close air support, but I hope you all learned something. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments.